Dr. Marches, and dear friends, on behalf of the Zabartnots Cultural Committee of Western Diocese of the Armenian Church, I welcome you all tonight for this, what is to be a very interesting topic, to be presented by Dr. Marches. And the topic, as you know, is about the sacred treasures from the Armenian churches of Constantinople. Before I invite Dr. Marches for his presentation, let me tell you who Dr. Marches is. Dr. Marches is a professor of ancient history and archaeology in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Minnesota at Duluth. He was also a member of the Center of Ancient Studies and the Interdisciplinary Archaeological Studies program at the University of Minnesota, Twin City campus. Marches has conducted archaeological research, both excavations and survey, in numerous locales in the Eastern Mediterranean, including Greece, Turkey, Israel. Marches, a two-time recipient of Fulbright Hays Award for the International Exchange of Scholars, has also conducted extensive ethno-archaeological research on nomadic material culture in the Middle East, especially in Turkey. He has lectured on nomadic material culture in the Middle East and Persian Gulf, including exhibitions of nomadic weavings. Marches is currently involved in geophysical research and survey at the ancient site of Palatai in Greece, the systematic study of Armenian Orthodox sacred art from the Armenian Patriarchate in Istanbul, Turkey, as well as continuing his work in ethno-archaeology on village culture and the disappearing world of nomads in eastern Turkey. He has held numerous academic awards and research grants over the past 30 years, as well as presented and published articles and books on various topics of the ancient world and its modern equivalents. The volume, called Splendor and Pageantry, Textile Treasures from the Armenian Orthodox Churches of Istanbul, unquote, which he co-authored with Marlene Bro and the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul, is the recipient of Shep Ethnic Textiles Book Award for 2011 from the Textile Society of America. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure to invite Dr. Marches to give his presentation.
I always like to start off, first of all, I want to thank the community, its clerical representatives, and members of, I assume, the Board of Directors for the Western Diocese for the invitation. It is an honor for me to speak on a topic that is very precious, a topic that is very sensitive, not only for the Armenian community, but for its religious representatives. In many respects, it is a topic, the artwork and so forth, that has been unfortunately ignored over many, many decades. But what my colleague and I, Professor Marlene Brew and myself, and others within the Istanbul, Constantinople community, what we tried to do was to be very sensitive to this very important piece of human culture, not just for the Armenian community, the Orthodox community, but for all Christians in general. The representations that we will see both in the textile traditions and in the metalwork are indeed superb. Almost nothing is known about the embroiderers or the seamstresses or even the metallurgists and jewelers that produce these brilliant items, some of which are one-of-a-kind, true pieces of religious art. For them to be recognized was unimportant, because most of the material recognized those that provided the donations to their requisite churches and also to their clergy in the celebration of the Divine Liturgy. In many respects, the textiles especially, you would say, well, this is just women's work, okay? And yes, indeed, it truly is women's work. But it's women's work at a level of brilliance that is very rarely surpassed. Armenian embroiderers especially, and weavers, as many know, were some of the greatest, made some of the greatest contributions in terms of material culture, not only in the Middle East, but also within the human community. And it should be recognized as such. So what we tried to do in terms of the publications that we've had on this material, which has been very well received, and I feel very humbled by the accolades that have been provided by many audiences. What we tried to do was to balance the scholarship and the sensitivity of the material, not to be so terribly overtly religious in nature, even though the material is predominantly of a religious genre. More often than not, most people will tend to ignore that. And the question that we would ask is why? Very simply, most Christians don't know the history or the theology of their own religion. And so it's very difficult to talk about some of these things, where these artisans and craftspeople, where they drew their inspiration. It's no different than those Renaissance artists in the Western tradition that drew their inspiration from the previous generations of artistic interpreters, but all of these individuals understood the Old and the New Testament and the religious scriptures that go beyond. And it includes also the historical relevance of specific individuals, certainly for the Armenian Orthodox community, the stories associated with St. Gregory and his successors. This was fact, not just belief. And so, as I said, we tried to balance both in relation to some of the material. And so what we have here, I use the title Treasures of Faith. People hang their names on buildings and it goes along in terms of one's own ego. But when individuals make things to be dedicated for the celebration of the Divine Liturgy, the celebration of the Mass, and all of its associated issues and celebrations, and they're not known who they were, they do it out of a commitment of the term we would use today, which many people just don't follow anymore. Ideas of piety, being pious, creating things as a gift to God. And I must admit, in all honesty, I was very fortunate to grow up in an Italian household in which my grandmother, my mother's mother, resided within the household. And at times, when she was rolling out the dough to make the ravioli, she would implore Santa Maria to make the raviolis. You know, it never really dawned on me what she was talking about. But to guide her hands in making sauce in a specific celebration of a specific type of meal for the family after a Sunday church. To employ the Virgin Mary, to employ God, to create something that is truly a work of art. And that's what we have here, okay, in many respects. So I will stop talking because that is an occupational hazard. As a now retired professor, thank goodness probably, and I'm very happy about that, I must admit, in terms of being retired. There will be more lectures on Saturday, and I hope many of you please would attend for a very, very good program. I'll be giving a little bit more information on both the textile tradition as well as the metallurgy this coming Saturday on October 18th. As is the case with all opportunities to study religious material especially, okay? His Beatitude Mesrop II on the left, and Archbishop Aram Ateshin, who was here last year. Without the guiding spirit of both these individuals, though unfortunately the illness of Mesrop came very early in his life, and but Archbishop Aram certainly picked up where he had left off. Both of these individuals were guiding lights in relation to getting the material from the churches, from their depots, so we could study them. And in fact, Archbishop Aram at times would get very upset at some of the boards of directors, and I said, well, they're not cooperating. And he said, let me talk to them. He would give a call, and I said, well, what did you say? I said, if they don't give you access to the depot and the objects that I want you to look at, they won't get a priest for Sunday services. So, you know, a little strong arm tactics at times, but many of the communities were very fearful to share the material, and I think part of that is obviously based upon the last 100 years in terms of history, and earlier when material was requisitioned by the Ottoman authorities. Much of the material culture in Constantinople of the Armenian Orthodox churches was seized by the Turks as part of their monetary policies. And so relics were saved, but the enshrinement of the relic in a jajank or a standard, where all the pertinent information was, since that was gold and silver, that was confiscated by the Ottoman authorities to pay for their war efforts against the Russians, especially from the late 18th century onwards. And so there are a couple of slides I will show you that will certainly bring tears to your face and sadness to your heart. But both of these individuals should be recognized as such for the great service they have done in allowing this material to be studied. The first book on the side, I'm not going to read it, I will read some of the text. Splendor and Pageantry, Amazon.com, and also Nettleberry, that's the USA affiliate. It did win a R.L. Shep Award on ethnic textiles. This is an international award by the Textile Society of America, and we felt very, very honored that the recognition of the work and of those people that produced it, because the book is also dedicated to the Armenian community, those faceless individuals that animated Armenian society, you know, of the past especially. And so I was very, very pleased and very humbled that the book received the award, and in that manner it certainly helped in relation to all the hard work that we had accomplished. The second work deals primarily with the metal work. This is volume 2. It's in press now. It's going through its final editing. It should be out at the end of this year or early next year. The volume includes a CD at the end as a catalog. And again, we break the entire catalog down as we did with the textile stuff, material, talking about the techniques of making the objects. No one has done this, which is really very, very interesting overall. Over 400 pages of text. It'll be very important for both Armenian studies as well as Ottoman studies as well. Approximately 150 plates in color. You can certainly contact me at my email address at the bottom. We did receive a Zorhab Liebman Foundation Award for the publication of the book. We're also receiving some donations to cover the costs. The printing costs were still unfortunately short, which will come out of, unfortunately, my pocket as well as my colleague's pocket for the final publication of the book. But we have received substantial support from the Zorhab Liebman Foundation in New York for the publication of this work overall. Religious art, the arts are the fingerprints of a nation left behind throughout the ages for others to examine, admire, and learn. It's a window through which the soul of a nation is portrayed. It's a reflection of its culture during triumph, defeat, joy, and sorrow. Objects communicate social identity and help define societal values and moral principles. The collection of objects in the Armenian Orthodox churches of Istanbul confirm these views. The interconnection between material culture, social identity, artisanship, and communal beliefs. Making and donating objects for the church was a pious act, with each item considered a statement of faith. Contributions from one's own hand instilled within the maker a sense of fulfillment and involvement in the spiritual life of the community. Unfortunately, there are very few surviving objects dating from before the year 1600. Most of those are illuminated manuscripts, which is a scriptoria tradition produced in monasteries by well-trained monks. There are over 30,000 are known. In fact, one of the great discoveries took place just less than a decade ago in the Patriarchate in Istanbul, where over 550 unknown illuminated manuscripts were recently discovered. They were being examined by the Brothers of St. John at St. John's University in Minnesota until they were digitizing all the material, and whatever happened, the project stopped. There were some disagreements in relation to how the material should be disseminated, but 550 unknown manuscripts were found in the archives of the Istanbul Patriarchate. Probably many of these do date to maybe around 1600 or slightly earlier, but some go back to the Kingdom of Cilicia in the 14th century. And those are superb examples of the manuscript tradition. 30,000 are known. Many of these are attributed to the patronage of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia in the 13th and 14th centuries, and a scattering of brilliant architectural remains of various periods. Within the Ottoman state, the lack of material is due to many reasons. Contextualized to the economic and social situations of the period and the conscious and absolute destruction of Armenian culture, which takes place in the 18th and 19th centuries. Armenian rule in Cilicia proved beneficial to the development of Armenian culture, contemporary with the Crusades, especially the Fourth Crusade of 1204, and the establishment of the Latin Kingdom of Constantinople, and the older Latin kingdoms and principalities of the Levant. The Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia was well connected to the European military orders of the Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights. Due to military necessities and the protection of the Silesian frontier under these military orders, Silesian ports are open to merchants from the Italian republics, with special privileges granted to the Genoese, the Venetians, and the Pisans. Common commercial and military interests also stimulated artistic experimentation. Okay, this should not be underestimated. The give and take of their fellow Christian brethren. Sharing a common cause with their Christian brethren, the Kingdom of Cilicia developed as a major cultural center that featured evolving international trends, especially in the arts. As a Franco-Byzantine style emerged in Constantinople and its environs, especially in painting and sculpture, new methods of interpreting well-established themes in Armenian religious art, still partially influenced by Byzantine constructs, evolved into a brilliant display of color and composition unknown in the previous centuries. This is especially evident in illuminated manuscript tradition that developed in the 13th century, as seen in the work of the gifted artist Toros Roslin, the foremost illuminator of medieval Armenia, and his students. Okay, although Roslin's work and those he influenced contain many connections with the art and iconography of the Crusader period, their artistic achievements redefined and energized Armenian religious art. And we see this for certain in the illuminated manuscript tradition. It is not with the heavy use of colors and foreboding and sadness. Almost all the images from this one illuminated manuscript dated to 1223. The illuminated pages show the Virgin Mary and show Christ and the apostles with smiles on their face. They're not done in the heavy, overburdening, depressing colors that we see within the Greek Orthodox tradition. There is something lively here, something to rejoice. And what that rejoicement is all about is scriptural in nature, the salvation of mankind through the sacrifice of Christ. And this is captured wonderfully in the illuminated manuscript pages from the 13th and 14th centuries. Population within the Ottoman state was small. People don't realize this. 24 million people. Obviously not all Turk. The requisite foreign, quote, millets, or subject peoples, were substantial in numbers. And the circles, the smaller circles, indicate the Armenian populations. In many areas of central and eastern Anatolia and further afield, the Armenian population was in the plurality. And with those Greek populations, the Christian population held the majority. Okay? Overall. Anatolia, areas of population density and migration to Constantinople. Most of those will come from central and eastern Anatolia, from the Lake Van area and further afield. Certainly after 1451 1751 when the Armenian Patriarchate was established. This became eventually the most heavily populated Armenian community in the early 19th century throughout the world. And where did those people come from? They had made their fortunes and reputations in the East in the homeland of Armenia. But they gained valuable commissions in Constantinople, where the political and religious powers were located. Okay? Valuable commissions from the Divan, from the Ottomans, valuable commissions from the newly established Patriarchate, which eventually does gain a universal recognition, certainly by the 1700s, as the most important of all the patriarchates within the Armenian tradition. Many of these places in eastern Anatolia had regional and sub-regional styles, and they would never have fused together except in a cosmopolitan world such as Constantinople. They would have remained separate. There would have been a Gaziantep tradition, especially in needlecraft. There was a Mardin and Diyarbakir and Van tradition. And those have been well documented, especially in terms of the production of needle lace, which was an Armenian tradition and a dominant industry. By the 18th century, the evolution of a Constantinople style patterned an increase in the Armenian population of the city. Continuous Armenian immigration from eastern and central and western Anatolia infused the city with a number of regional and sub-regional styles that added bold elements to an otherwise conservative and exhausted urban material culture that was mostly Byzantine in nature. By the 18th century, European cultural influences into the Oriental flavor of the Ottoman capital fostered a more cosmopolitan atmosphere that enhanced experimentation outside the accepted canons of Armenian church art. Now, those that resided in Constantinople, this was no small population. It may have been small, certainly in the 15th and 16th centuries, but Armenians always resided in the city from the very beginning of Constantine's foundation. There were individuals that came there to be educated in the scriptoria of Constantinople before the creation of the Armenian alphabet. And we have constant remarks about this. There may not be the historical hard data, but if oral tradition accepts it as such, and it's recognized by all, there is a basis of reality there. Okay? You've got to remember that in the Ottoman world of Constantinople, after 1453, okay, 1461 is the there were 75 fires in the city, and some of them swept away entire districts. And all of the documents and all of the art, not only of Ottomans, but of Greeks and Armenians, the historical records. 75 major fires, and some of which consumed whole districts of Kumkapi and Yenikapi and Samatya and Beyazit and Topkapi itself, in the region of Topkapi, the palace. And so what was lost, we can only imagine. And so this was no small population by the 19th century. Between 1750 and 1850, the vast majority, 55% of all Armenian churches were founded or provided with firmans to be built, out of the 72 that make up the Orthodox community. 55%. And as you can see, some of these were large by area. Serpach in Uskadar, also with St. John the Precursor, is a little bit further to the right. Right there is St. John's, and this is the Holy Cross there. Holy Cross, by the way, was the richest of all the churches. Others in Kumkapi and Yenikapi and Beyazit, and this is Bakir Koy, and up here towards the Beşiktaş area, there were numerous churches. So we had a very dense population, and the churches could not service all of those that belong to the Armenian Orthodox tradition or rite. So as I said, it was a very large population. Artistic experimentation needed patrons. Although the church was initially the source of such patronage, this was eventually surpassed by an emerging Armenian, and put it in quotes, aristocracy. They're called the Amira class. There are over 165 families that make up the Amira class. These are the great Ottoman Armenians, okay? Its wealth, that is the Amira class, its wealth and social status within the Armenian community, especially in Istanbul, attracted Armenian artisans and their families to the city in order to gain valuable commissions. This continuous flow of talent from the East refreshed and kept alive native traditions in the Constantinople style. So it's not always, from the Western point of view, it's a good balance between Western influence and Eastern influence that kept alive and defined what we eventually interpret as the Constantinople style, as a specific style of religious art. New ideas for interpreting common themes from the West did not create imitators, and that's very important. In this manner, artistic achievement matched the growing opulence and grandeur of a city many Armenians came to love as their own. Approximately 22 to 30% of the city were Armenian by 1825 to 1850, out of about a million. Through their labor, Istanbul and the church prospered, and in time the Armenian community became one of the most important ethnic groups in the city. The Constantinople style coincides with the rise of the Amira class, which start to become a major factor as donators of wealth and money and the commissions that were offered from 1750 to 1850. Now, if we look at the density of occupation, silversmiths in Kumkapi, Yenikapi, in the area of Topkapi, Beşiktaş, on the other side, on the Asian side, these were substantial. And they sort of reconfirmed the increase in population. There was a great necessity for secular objects of silver as well as religious objects. This is the district where the Patriarchate is located, the Holy Mother of God Cathedral here. The new Mutafian Center is there, one of the three churches. That's the church there, the Mutafian Center is here. But this is the Patriarchate, and there's a large Greek basilica. This is the districts of Kumkapi, Yenikapi, and further that way would be Samatya. Some of the areas are completely Armenian, others were a combination, mixed neighborhoods of Armenians and Greeks. In Balat, which is on the other side on the Golden Horn, was a population of Armenians, Greeks, and Jews. Okay, so many of these foreign millets did congregate within their own communities, okay, which had their own artisans that they obviously supported through commercial means. So again, they weren't just specifically isolated, as some believe. These were composite neighborhoods. The Constantinople textile art, a unique combination of the Oriental and Occidental. Textiles are an integral part of Armenian material culture, both secular and religious. Weaving, embroidery, needle lace, obviously, were the domain of women. It is gender specific, and that's very important to grasp, because how did women participate? They participated by producing the finery worn by the celebrant of the Divine Liturgy, which would be the clergy. Embroidery was part of the domestic handicraft tradition. Embroidery schools, however, were established only in the early 19th century in order to fill the growing needs of the church. Many of the objects produced for the church were made at home and not in factories, especially the smaller objects and apparel worn by the clergy, including mitres, crowns, chalice covers, collars, copes, stoles, altar frontals, niche covers, and altar curtains. The miniature and the monumental. The latter category also appears to have been produced in schools and in cottage industries. And here we have a stamp from one of the most important of the Armenian amiras of the 19th century, Harutian Bejian. He established a school for girls to continue on the tradition of embroidery because of the increase in the number of Armenians within the city and the increase in the number of churches that were being established to serve their needs. And so during the course of numerous festivals and feast days, the raiment of altar covers and what the clergy wears is going to change. And there was a great demand. And since there was a great demand, Haruti and Bejian, one of the very few, established a school to specifically meet the needs of the church. He, by the way, his home church was Holy Cross in Üsküdar. In many respects, the Constantinople style reflects the success of heterogeneous Ottoman Istanbul, in that sumptuary arts depended on an atmosphere of opulence and wealthy patronage in which to thrive. A society where piety went hand in hand with a love of luxury and display, and men sought insurance for the welfare of their souls in eternity by lavish gifts to the churches on earth. Now, the transition to embroidery in religious art, the Armenian examples we have are predominantly from Constantinople, and they are interesting because they indicate a lingering late Byzantine tradition which was predominantly still weaving. Notice that the images are flat. Okay, the inscriptions are all in Armenian, but the iconography, it's almost as if we're looking at the apse of a Greek Orthodox church with its side galleries overall. Okay, this is probably the oldest surviving example that we have access to. I would probably date this tentatively because none of these have dates per se. Some of the early pieces are very rare. They are still used. Probably are late 15th or perhaps well into the 16th century. Textiles break down, especially if they're handled and used on a regular basis. Once they are consecrated with holy oil, they are a gift to God. They are not thrown away. The only way that they can be destroyed is through the consumption of fire. And even then, there was a conscious attempt to salvage pieces, and they were resewn onto newer base fabric because they were consecrated. They were part of the living heritage of the church. In the Roman Rite, the Greek Orthodox Rite, and in the Armenian Rite, we have prayers for the community. It's both the living and the deceased community because it forms one complete Christian community. Therefore, items from previous generations are remembrances of the living community. The commentary rejects death, asleep in Christ, is the refrain we find on numerous inscriptions as part of the formula, asleep in Christ. This is by date the oldest piece we had. It was dated 1680. The crown at St. Kyriakos Church in memory of Hoja Shahak and his father Vadavar and his mother Chohar in the year 1130. Again, the imagery sort of reflects a weaving tradition, not an embroidery tradition. Okay? When we move into the 1700s, we start seeing a movement towards three-dimensional imagery that sort of follows the traditions that are developing certainly within the European heritage of embroidery work. Now, these are examples that are at Echmiadzin, dating from the 1700s. This wonderful commitment to detail. This is a miniature tradition. These images are no bigger than to the base of your index finger. They're 9 and 10 centimeters. That's all. But notice the commitment to detail within this oval cartouche. The resurrected Christ is a common example. The treatment of the anatomy and so forth. Almost all of the facial features and flesh features are usually silk. Everything else afterwards or around it, all including the angels, that's also silk. But all of this is wire thread. silver and gold or gilded silver in gold, okay? What we get is a layered tradition, which is very, very unique. It's not just one image, but there are a series of images folded into the presentation of the mitre or other objects worn by the clergy. This is one of my favorites, dated to 1800, for the enjoyment of Pogos Vardapet, who gave this as a memorial gift to the Holy Mother of God Church of Bursa. Here is our little Longinus figure at the tomb of the resurrecting Christ. The face is smaller than your thumbnail, but look at the detail. This is all silk, and it's three-dimensional. Okay, it stands about 1 centimeter to 3 centimeters off of the base fabric from the previous examples we saw. But notice all of the intricate work and the changing of the stitching techniques that creates depth of field. Very difficult to do. If this was an illuminated manuscript, no problem. You change the shading, that's all it is. But this is done in metal, thread, and cloth. It's a much harder tradition to create a three-dimensional image. On the other side is the enthroned Christ with the Virgin Mary and Peter and Paul on the side. But this is one of my favorites. When I've used this slide the first time at a medieval conference, people thought it was a fresco or a mosaic, as we have in our Hagia Sophia on one of the side chapels, okay? And they could not believe that this was smaller than your thumbnail. And look at the detail, look at the shading technique in the multicolored strands of the beard, which is very fine silk, to create a three-dimensional image. Who produced this? The maker is unknown, as is the case for all. Only known to God, okay? And that's what's really very sad, but it is definitely ranks right with the greatest miniature traditions that we have in the 13th century. One of my favorites, this again, the detail here is unbelievable. Look at the anatomy. Look at the extension of Christ's body and the extension of the arms. Okay, and then around the head, here's the detail. This is smaller than your little fingernail. Okay? The crown of thorns, the radiating sunburst behind the head of Christ, the closed eyes, death has already taken place, very, very rarely shown the suffering of the crucifixion. It is always shown 99% of the time in Armenian art, especially from the textile tradition, with Christ already expired. Again, following the inspiration of the New Testament when in the final hour of his death. But the droplets of blood here and here, the wound and the droplets of blood here on the cross, and yet this image is only that big. Only that big. But the detail is anatomically correct. Now we have no idea about the education of these women, how they were trained except in the family tradition of embroidery, since it is a domestic tradition. But here the person has duplicated in a three-dimensional image. The background, by the way, here is very fine silk, and then very fine silk thread here, slightly different colored, but you can see how it's layered and then burnished to provide shape and form, as if we are dealing with a person indeed crucified. Okay? It is an emotional piece. We have chalice covers. This obviously comes from the Eastern Anatolian Armenian world, because the motifs is typical in relation to Armenian architectural design. Dates to probably the late 1700s or so. Thank you. Again, chalice covers are very important. They basically are 1 meter by 1 meter. They're placed over the chalice, and usually right there in the center, that's what covers the cup of life, the bowl at the very top of the chalice, which we'll see some examples of. This is more of a Greek Orthodox tradition. So again, many traditions were shared. Some of the initial belief is that these people very rarely interacted. And since they did live in mixed neighborhoods, we do find this as a very common motif. Christ in the cup coming out in the crucified form with the elements of the Passion forms the center of this chalice cover. And here we have the veil is in memory of Abraham, Samuel, Osamar, and others, Palasan, and so forth, and his father Samuel and Miriam, Kendinets, Gaspar, and so forth, 1262 of the Armenian calendar, 1813. And on the four corners, we have the evangelical writers. So again, it's all scriptural in nature as an altar cover. This is one of my favorites. When we were dealing with this, it dates certainly to the late 1700s. It comes from Uskadar, Holy Cross at Uskadar. The gold and silver work in the Lamb of God, which re-enters Armenian art, predominantly after the collapse of the Silesian kingdom, no doubt coming from the west. But notice the treatment of the face, looking back towards the standard. The silver on the body, you can see that it is three-dimensional in nature. The silver here is done in a different type, maybe a higher quality. This is more burnished here. This is shinier. The silk globe surrounded by roses with ornamentation of pearls. This was still being used, and when we were handling it, the base fabric was tearing because it was so heavy. And it just in our heart stopped. And here we have the archangels. This is actual human hair on the side, done in a French knot technique of embroidery or needlecraft. So again, we looked at all of the techniques, and no one has ever done this. That is the different techniques employed by the women that produced spectacular images. Okay, and then here we get a wonderful body of floral designs. This is gold and silver wire thread. The Armenians were the best of the best. They surpassed the Levantines and Greeks in the creation of very fine gold and silver wire. Why doesn't many of these items survive? Because the churches were forced to give these to the authorities, which then burnt them to extract the metal. First, the pearls and the precious stones are taken off, and then they are burned, and then the metal is pulled, and it pulls in the lower bottom of the pit, and then it goes off to the mint to make coinage. And so, very few examples do indeed survive, and this was really very sad overall. This is how it's used on the altar, okay, in terms of the chalice, and then on the center are these heavily embroidered central themes that usually radiate out. In this case, we have a radiating sunburst, which was a very common motif that was used on these examples. We have stoles. This is again worn as part of the undergarment. During the process of the dressing of the celebrant, prayers are stated at each stage in terms of the layering of the material. Literally being encased in a shroud of brilliance, okay? And that has a very Old Testament association. But we have two examples here. The one on the side here comes from Eastern Anatolia, that was then dedicated to one of the churches in Constantinople. And we get the Almighty Father, the Holy Spirit within the radiating sunburst, and then Christ at the bottom holding the book, the New Testament. But we have emanating from him the tree of Jesse, which reflects back upon the lineage of Abraham. And when I asked Archbishop Aaron, he looked at it and said, well, those are the 12 apostles. And I said, but half of them are women. Oh, okay. And then he walked away. Here's an example. This was saved because it was re-sewn onto a new base fabric. But if we could use the term le primitive, it is unique, whereas the example to the left has more of a French tradition in terms of the finery showing the 12 apostles here, and then the Archangel Gabriel and the Virgin Mary. Okay, and when we see this, there's that. Notice the folds of the drapery and the face. And this cartouche, along with the 12 of the apostles, which are all unique, by the way. Everyone is different. Is only that big. That big. Okay? All of this detail. But the embroiderer has changed the stitching technique to create all of these layers. Okay? And so in that manner, as you look at it, you see the folds of the garment, the Virgin Mary, and you see how they would have laid or dropped as she is stunned by the appearance of the archangel. You know, she bows down. You have a question? Okay, I'll do it. Go ahead. She said I shouldn't do that. Okay, but that's all right. Go ahead. What?
Is it also three-dimensional?
It's three-dimensional, yes. It stands off away from the base fabric by about 1.5 centimeters. Okay, so there's a little bit of padding underneath to create that three-dimensional image. We do have some stamps. This is from Bejion, Haruki and Bejion, 1831. This one is an accession number here. For our one of our guests here, this is the only stamp we have that may be a manufacturing stamp, okay, of a jeweler. It's the only one. Here is the typical tura that will appear on metal objects to indicate the fact that the metal is 925 silver or gold. It has to have the armatura. The monumental. As we have the miniature tradition, we also have a monumental tradition, especially in relation to these large altar screens. At the very bottom here, oh, don't do that. There is the Virgin Mary with a lantern.
Wow.
She is the light that guides the way. The center part comes from a much older altar curtain that was kept alive and sewn onto this new piece. But that image right down here within this wonderful floral pattern, this is 4 meters by 3 meters, by the way, it's very large, was a very, very unique image. It's the only image we saw with the Virgin Mary with the lantern. Normally we see the precursor with the incense burner. But this was the only one that we ever saw with her with the lantern. This is another altar curtain. It comes from probably Madrasa in India. The eyes here are all, they indicate a Far Eastern tradition. This is block printed. Block printing of fabric, by the way, was a major Armenian commercial enterprise, especially in Constantinople, where block printed commercial fabric was made for the secular market. Okay? We don't have any examples of them actually making the larger altar curtains or niche covers from Constantinople. But we do know that pieces were sent from India and other Armenian communities to grace the churches within Constantinople. Okay? Treasures from pilgrimage. Okay, and again, this is just going to be some of the examples that indeed exist overall in Echmiadzin. One of the things that I am hoping that someone will do is to focus purely on those pieces that came from the largest Armenian community, that were given in times of pilgrimage to Echmiadzin or to Jerusalem, because no one has looked at them as a unique artistic heritage of the brilliant artisanship from that community. Okay? And when you look at some of the garments that are in Echmiadzin, St. Gregory here, this is all embroidery. This is not weaving. Okay? Stoles, things of this nature. The sad point is that their treasuries are so large, we don't have any coherent study of the contributions from one community. Okay, which was the richest and largest within the Armenian world. It's one of my favorites again, beautiful niche cover, and the image of St. Gregory over here, and the unbelievable refinement of his large cope and mitre, staff, things of this nature. Again, we have what we have called a multi-layered tradition numerous themes being presented in one embroidery, okay? And we can see those here. There's crucifixion, obviously, the descent from the cross, the carrying of the cross, again, images of the passion, okay, on the bottom, and the three women, God the Father Almighty. So again, all done in gold and silver and very fine silk, and with freshwater pearls. This again is a altar cover that shows the Last Supper, and again, the detail work is phenomenal in nature. We have the silk faces; they're all individual in nature, and the garments and so forth done in very, very fine gold and silver thread. Now, who were the Armenians who made donations to their churches? The inscriptions from the liturgical metalwork, the craftsmen and artists responsible for their execution were predominantly laymen, especially in these late centuries. This is in marked contrast to those who produced Armenian manuscripts. Scribes and artists were almost without exception clergymen, usually working with a monastery in an isolated or near isolated rural environment. Metalworkers, whether crafting objects in iron, bronze, or copper, or jewelers, working with silver, gold, and precious stones, were in an urban or semi-urban environment, a town or a village. As for liturgical garments, altar curtains, chalice covers, and other textiles, these are reserved for female creators. This tripartite division of the arts and crafts in medieval and early modern Armenia, clergy, craftsmen, women with textiles, has not been sufficiently studied and will probably yield interesting information on the social stratification of Armenian life. In this way, that is by creating liturgical art, the church succeeded in integrating all elements of society around its daily ritual. Okay? Now, this is the back on the inset of a cope. And it says it here. And the person really brags about how much money they have. So you really wonder about the person's piety. This holy and costly sacerdotal set of vestments, and the vestments were made as a set, is a memorial gift to Holy Cross Church of the village of Apuchek in the region of Akin. It's going to be Eastern Anatolia. They are embroidered, and now comes the litany of wealth, embroidered with diamond crosses, pearls, silver thread, namely the crown, the amici, the cope, the stole, the mantles, the girdle, the slippers, through the provision and subsidy of the God-loving Hovannes Aga, so he's of the aristocracy, or presumed aristocracy, son of the senior father, Stefan Ter, that means father, and then his name, and his spouse, the humble Miss Eva, and his son, Stefan Aga, and his daughter-in-law, Denis Hanun, and his daughter, blah, blah, blah. And may our memory not be forgotten before the immortal Lamb of God. And let him save us with all our relatives from visible and invisible tribulations. Donated 1834. We don't know anything about the person who made the garment, but we certainly know an awful lot about the people that donated overall. Now, donations. Donations included miters, vakas, kala, lappets. And here we have Christ and the 7 12 apostles. The crown is for the enjoyment of Zechariah, Patriarch of Constantinople, and second lelegate, that is agent, of Holy Echmiadzin in the year 1228, 1779. The mitre included the conversion of the Armenian royal family by St. Gregory. Brilliant piece of workmanship. Another one. This is a memory of a person who was a pilgrim, Sarkis, and another pilgrim, Malike, at the Holy Cross Church of 1825. And again, the apostles on the bottom, and also on the crown itself. Liturgical garments were the product of domestic production and not state-sponsored, since political independence had disappeared in the 14th century. And here again we get this wonderful patch. There were 4 of them in nature. They have survived. Here's the inscription, 1791, embroidered slippers with the scorpion and the snake, okay, as you tread upon evil, and that has a lot of symbolism as well. One of my favorites is this niche cover. Now there's an example of this similar that's called Ottoman in nature, but the inscription is all Armenian here, and no doubt much of that material culture that is referenced, like in the museums around the world. This comes from the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, is always called Ottoman in nature, and very likely it was actually made by other individuals, no doubt Armenians, who were the best of the embroiderers. This curtain at the Holy Mother of God Church, the village of Everegg, is in memory, and then all these people are listed in the same year. Now, did they die in an earthquake? Were they forced laborers? They're all listed as such. We know nothing about them. And those who are deceased, and all those who are living, and those who are deceased. It probably is a commemoration of those individuals that were taken by the state to maybe go work in the galley yards in Isteniye in the Golden Horn. There were 3 churches in that area, by the way, to serve the Armenian population. 3 churches in the galley yards, the naval yards of the Ottoman state. And those were conscripted forced labor. This one really drives that point home. This holy radiance is in memory of the boys who are now in Istanbul for the enjoyment of Everegg, Kayseri, St. Taurus, St. Theodore's Church. And it's in memory of those boys that are no longer there, requisitioned forced labor to the state. We get a large number of metal objects. Some are unique in their own right. This has more of a Greek Orthodox tradition. Numerous examples of this, by the way, exist in Crete, where there was a large Armenian population, as well, obviously, as Greek. This Holy Cross is in memory of Usta. Usta is like a foreman, Gazar's wife, and its name at the gate of the Holy Cross Church in Uskadar, 1780. It's one of the oldest pieces we have, actually, from Uskadar. A holy relic, done in a very simple but unique form with a very large inscription, and it's all mentioned here, okay? Those blessed apostles, Thaddeus, the Holy Virgin Hypsina, Patriarch Aristake, they are intercessors before the Lord. The date 1745. It's a reliquary in nature. And then all those people that are listed, my brothers and my entire family, and you shall receive what you seek in the year 1194. This is a cross that was given by, and the inscription that's there, the example probably is Greek Orthodox here, there are Greek letterings on the side. Holy Cross granted by a cardinal, and he's known historically, there he is in terms of his name, to the Patriarch Hovannes Vardape. This is John IX Golod, who was instrumental in establishing the second great Armenian renaissance of religious art in the early 1700s. And this was a cross dedicated to him, ornamented with gems and gold by Patriarch Jacob, a memorial to St. James, which is in Jerusalem in the year 1743. We also get vestries and large objects that grace the altar. The vestry is a memory of the soul of the late Mina Samira, village of Akin. Again, many from the east came from this area, of his wife Anna, who is alive, and they're living in the sleep, family members of the Holy Archangels in Balat, 1787. Okay, here is the buckle of John IX. Be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And that's a biblical, obviously biblical quote. And then here, the filigree work in gold, again, would have been worn as a girdle or belt in the dressing process. On a silver plate, well, some people try to guarantee the fact that their objects would not be destroyed. And this is a classic example. Given to the Church of St. Gregory the Illuminator in Galata, in memory of the souls of Father Marcos, the saintly priest, and his son, Arkel Aga, who is asleep in Christ. Let those who buy or sell this be eliminated from the register of life, and those who enjoy using it remembered before the Lord the souls who are asleep in Christ. And so the person put a curse. Anybody that gives this away, for whatever reason, buys it or sells it, may he be removed from the register of life. The Armenians of the Armenian community were very much aware that the objects of their ancestors or of their contemporaries at times were seized by the Ottomans as part of their financial responsibilities to the state. And so here is a person that, and this is the only example we have that we saw, actually places a curse, trying to guarantee the fact that this is given to God and it's not given to the state, and anybody who does dare take it away, let him be removed from the register of life. I like that. Okay? Armenian artisanship. Well, let's skip that and get on to some other things. Periodic re-examination of church collections and the seizure of objects should be viewed in the context of events. In those rare times of domestic tranquility, Ottoman bullion policies were probably more relaxed. And here we have target of opportunity for the state periodically examine the collections in order to gain silver. And here is the quote. It's from an Ottoman defter. When war broke out again, the army insisted that money sent from Istanbul be in the form of gold coins. Since the state did not have sufficient gold and silver stocks of coining, it was decreed that citizens had to surrender their gold and silver ware to the authorities in return for a set price. Usually it's going to be lower. In January 1817, the government began to collect up silver from eminent personages, and firmans, that is, orders, were issued prohibiting the use of silver by craftsmen. The Greek church was obliged to provide 6,000 oka, 7,680 kilos of silver. Armenian church 4,000, that's over 5,000 kilos. And the Jewish group 3,800. They were the smallest of the four millets.
They kept the rest.
They knew that.
Who knows what the rest was? Okay. Now, I did promise I'd show you one slide, and I'll have more of that later on. But this is what we have. We have numerous relics that have been stripped of their gold and silver, where all the inscriptions were. No information, obviously, where they came from, what church they came from in Anatolia, and so forth. And when I was in the Patriarchate one day, I walked by a room, on the floor, on tables, scattered around the room, in chairs, were the relics of the faithful that had donated to their churches, and all of those objects had been encased in gold and silver to grace the altars, as processional crosses, as fans, all of the physical paraphernalia used in the celebration of the Divine Liturgy. All that was left was the relic. This is a conscious effort to destroy the culture of others because of the needs of the state. Now the Armenians felt that, well, when times got better, they would add new encasements to those relics. But all the valuable information is gone, except for the relic itself. Okay? We're going to skip this. This deals just with the process of manufacturing. Silversmiths are concentrated in many areas, and they serve the needs of the church. Wonderful examples, incense burners and holders. Here we have the Ottoman Sultan to the side. This is the Yassir's mark here. There is a symbol of silver, and there's the date. That may be a manufacturer's symbol on top. Again, one of the very few that we actually have. This is dated to 1845. Beautiful piece of workmanship. The commitment to detail on standards and fans and processional items, which were made in sets, okay, depict and tell a story. Now let's go back to that again. Here is Christ carrying the cross, obviously, looking back at the image, the Vera icon. There it is. That image here, carved, is not visible if you're 5 feet away from the standard. but why did the person put it there? To be truthful to the event. And you don't offer schlep to God. Even if the image can't be viewed, the detail work is superb. A master craftsman, an artist, unknown. By far some of the most valuable objects, the cup of life, the chalice. This one comes from Uskadar, sorry about that. And here we have images. We have horizontal and vertical representations. We have God the Father, God Almighty, we have Christ, and we have the Holy Spirit around the cup. And then down below we have the crucifixion and the Virgin Mary. And down below we have scenes, despondent Christ with the instruments of the Passion. Garden of Gethsemane with very sleepy apostles. The next image, okay, one more, is this one. At the base, the cup of life comes from the Sacred Heart, which is a Western tradition, but it flows from the heart of Christ as the drink of life. And where does it go? It goes into the vat with the grapes around the side. This is very similar to many German motifs in the early modern period, by the way. And then from here comes the salvation liquid. But it emanates from the heart. That is the only example we saw. This is truly a one-of-a-kind piece. And heavily used. As these pieces are here. This is one of my favorites, with all of the roses and the wheat and so forth. And then we have here two different types. One is larger than the other, but the scenes are unique. This is what we get. We get the evangelists with their sacred images, okay, all along the base. And then we have Bartholomew and Thaddeus in the pillar area. And then we have these cloud motifs along the side. Very unique. Then we get altar standards as reliquaries. The imagery here of all the elements of the Passion, and then here with the three crosses on Golgotha. Again, a brilliant piece of artisanship. That's why that's not much about. Other altar pieces in gold and silver with precious stones. Examples. So these are all appearing in the second book, by the way. One of my favorites is these containers for incense done in the architectural style of Eastern Anatolia and Armenia in terms of the cupolas of the churches. Altar ornaments, the descent from the cross, women on the side here, angels at the feet of Christ. And there was a small inscription here, by the way. The people at Uskadar, at Holy Cross, did not even know who had donated this until we looked at it, and I said, there's an inscription here. And the guy said, Haru. It's got to be Haruti and Bejion. It was dedicated by Haruti and Bejion in 1831. They didn't even know it. And it's a brilliant piece of gold, silver, and enamel work. One of my favorites, again, these are all images from the second book, is the Myron vessel. But we're going to look at the base here. And here we have a very unusual scene. Very rarely it appears. Pentecost. And here we have the images. Beautifully tooled, gold and silver and gilded. The flames of the Holy Spirit, the radiating sunburst, the Virgin Mary. And the faces are all literally unique. A brilliant piece of artisanship, yet a one-of-a-kind piece. We have basins, and we have older style fans that are certainly of the 18th century that have still survived with wonderful imagery. This is a small ornament that hung from a chandelier, and this was in the Fisherman's Church in Kumkapi, right along the coast. And it was dedicated by the fishermen. Beautiful piece of silver work, this little kayak, or a little ship, And then on the name of the fish is the name Aram, the person that either dedicated it, and it is hung on the base of the chandelier. Also, metalwork appears on the crowns. The motif here, the endearing motif of mother and child, Armenian inscription, Last Supper here, other imagery along the crown. But this is more of a Greek motif, and it does come from Eastern Anatolia, eventually finding its way to the Patriarchate. Okay, again, you see this on a large altar frontal with these plaques of gold and silver. This was an altar frontal that was about 3.5 meters long by 2.5, 3 meters wide. This is the central part of it. One of my favorites, again, is a metal crown on base fabric, St. Gregory in the center, and we get the Holy Spirit between the Almighty Father and Christ on the other side. Again, the casting work on this is quite unique. It's the only example we saw there. There are still Armenian artisans, by the way, we'll finish this in a few minutes, that still do commissioned work. This person is now retired, and this was being done for the Greek Orthodox Patriarch in Constantinople. There's only 2,000 left, and here is the finished product. Armenians made things for Greeks, and guess what? Greeks probably made, there's his inscription on the piece, and Miltiades in the Uzun Çarşı'yı, the long bazaar, which is down by the waterfront. This was a donation box, off the shelf. People bought items to donate to the Armenian church. The plaque on the front of the donation box, 1913, all Armenian. But the manufacturer is Greek, sort of dispelling the fact that these individuals did not either get along or frequent other Christian artisans, because we do have some examples of this. Again, this hand cross, carved in wood and then encased in gold and silver. Silver and gold belts, the Ottoman tura, denoting the quality of gold and silver, is on each one of the eyelets. Okay, so it was stamped with the Iranian Ottoman Sultan. Censers, they're always made in pairs, and there are, again, numerous figures on these that are biblical in nature. The artisanship, again, tends to stand out. And this is the reason why these Armenian artisans were the best of all the foreign groups within the city of Constantinople. A large fan. These were done in pairs. Again, many of these that were commissioned on multiple objects that were produced in donation. Pendants worn by the patriarch. The filigree work here for a writing desk of another patriarch. Again, brilliant examples of the jeweler's art in nature. The image here has a Greek inscription, and probably the enameled face probably does come from Greek manufacture, but the artisanship of the setting is no doubt all of Armenian. Religious artifacts are more than brilliant and pious works of art, and they are more than pretty pictures. What can be gleaned from such artifacts is quite amazing and reinforced in physical form the transformations taking place in human society. This is based upon Barsomian's work that's been republished. The title of Emir is associated particular frequency with the honorific title of Aga. Many an Emira was the son of an Aga, the use of multiple titles and so forth. But these titles were starting to be usurped in the 19th century by the petty bourgeoisie, the emerging Armenian middle class. And so, what did these older 165 plus Emiras do? They changed their titles. Okay? It also should be noted that many possessed a nomenclature that enhanced their character. Superior in honor, honorable dignity, of princely race, noble ancestry, prince of great honor, bright prince, great prince, freeborn man of noble ancestry, leader of the nation, of great honor, leaders of the nation, full of grace, and strengthened by Christ. The latter phrase was only used by Haruti and Bejian, because no one could surpass him in prestige, dignitas, wealth, or status. He was the dear friend of one of the sultans, and actually, the Sultan and his wife, the Sultana, stayed in his house for 4 days. Okay, so he was by far strengthened by Christ. Prestige was a driving force for many in this group to attain a recognized higher position amongst their rivals and consequently a special place in society. If we want to chart this out, this is what we get. Armenian oligarchy challenged after 1850. The Emira class after 1850. We have the millet. The millet makes donations to churches, okay, church construction, okay, recognized authority and status. That is, the millet recognized the authority and the status of the Emira class, which was also recognized by the Ottoman Divan, okay. So they recognized them, and then these guys recognized them. In fact, many of them were the agents of the Ottomans, okay. They spoke for the Patrik, the patriarch. They chose the patriarch. Recognized authority to rule, and then the Ottomans recognized the authority to govern the millet. After 1850, the formation of an Armenian middle class that used the same titles as the older Emira class, they were not recognized by the Ottoman Divan, nor were they recognized by the Ottoman elites. Okay? But they were recognized by their local congregations, because many of them were on the boards of directors. They were the local aristocracy. Those people that helped make the donations, you know, paid the priest's salary, did the other things except hang their names on the wall of a church that was built in marble or stone. Personal donations and the celebration of the divine act. There you go. So here we have these guys, and we'll go back again. This is the Ottoman Emirs and the Ottoman Divan. Local elites that use the same titles as Emir or Aga, but they don't appear in the official registry. They were merchants, tradesmen, jewelers. They were not recognized by the Armenian elite, and they were not recognized by the Ottoman Divan. But they were recognized in the local congregations. And these people, internal and external revolution after 1850, social and political restructuring based upon enlightened principles of self-rule, democracy, libertas. Many of their children went to Europe and came back with foreign ideas. And they helped stimulate a reawakening within the Armenian community and the Armenian Congress that eventually forms a constitution. Thank you. The bottom line is artifacts have a lot of information, and that's why the inscriptions are so important, because place those in the context, we start getting the face of those people that made the donations and were actively involved in the 19th century politics in education, challenging the authority of the Emira class to choose the patriarch so that he would represent the community and not the interests of the elite. And this created the foundation of an internalized revolution to challenge the authority of the Ottoman Armenians, who were more self-serving to their interests than the interests of their community.
We will have a limited time for a few questions if there are any.
I know there's going to be a lot of questions.
But we're limited.
Go ahead.
Why do you use the Orthodox name? Because we call us
Apostolic.
Apostolic.
Yes. Look, the first manuscript that Mesra read, we had Orthodox. They went, no, Apostolic. So then we started to change everything, and then when we had to get sent to the translator, he changed it to Gregorian. No, that means you're ignoring the biblical tradition of the, not the received tradition, but the apostolic tradition. So he eventually said, we'll just use Orthodox as part of the general Orthodox community. But you're right, technically it should be apostolic. We went through this for about 3 years, okay, on what to do. And then when we got the word Gregorian tossed in, well, all hell did break loose, okay? So, yes, I agree with you. Yes.
we have seen enormous examples of Armenian embroidery from 15th century on. Have you ever had a chance to compare Armenian embroidery next to Greek or Judaica?
Good question. I asked a person who was first in the seminary as a Lutheran minister and then converted to Greek Orthodoxy, and I showed him the images. He said, "We have nothing like this in the Orthodox tradition." Well, they do certainly have an embroidery tradition, and we do know that there was an embroideress who established a very small school of Greek embroiderers, about 10 or 12, that existed in the 1700s in Constantinople. But that's all we know about them. We don't have any indications that they produced anything for the church. In fact, most of the material that was produced that was derived from a Byzantine tradition, because embroidery becomes very late in the Byzantine tradition, it was a weaving tradition. It was a cottage industry in the production of garments for the imperial household as well as for the upper clergy. But when the state falls on hard times, they start to move towards embroidery. Embroidery is enhancement of cloth, not as part of, whereas the image, which is flat in a weaving tradition, has no dimensionality. It's not three-dimensional in nature. That's what you could get with cloth enhancement. The best examples we have of Byzantine garments come from frescoes, and they come from mosaics. There are not that many examples overall. In fact, some of the examples we have in Western Europe that are of the medieval Byzantine period probably came from Greece. They came from the area around Thebes, especially in the 13th century, and we have the documents there because the Franks who controlled the area had established a rival silk production that built upon what had been left over from the collegia, that is Roman guilds, that were established and continued on the Byzantine tradition. It's very likely that the vast majority of silks that appear in Western European tradition did not come from Constantinople. The seconds came from the outlying provinces, because the best of the best was only meant for the imperial household in Constantinople and the clergy, and that was Greek Orthodox in nature. From almost the very beginning, all we have in the Armenian tradition is embroidery. Why? Because there was no state financing to finance the production of a guild-based weaving tradition. Without the support of an imperial state, domestic production are donations that come from households. Okay?
My second question...
But that's a very good point. Okay,
yeah.
you made, yeah.
A second question, because of its organic matter, they don't survive.
That's right.
And the oldest ones, we have probably few examples from 13th to 14th century, rarely seen as embedded in later pieces.
Yeah, right.
As you have...
Well, we have some pieces from the Coptic world, but that survived in
That's different.
Right,
that's
exactly.
different.
That was all a weaving tradition there. Again, not a
Coptic is much more in a lace form rather than embroidery.
Yes, right, exactly, absolutely. And they survive in a warm, because of the warm environment.
Right, and in Armenian, those, especially the miniature ones, the mastery in that craftsmanship, just by looking at those samples, how many generations you think as a craftsperson would take to develop that kind of mastery, copying from a previous generation, passing it on to the second and third and so forth, so on. Any guesstimate?
No.
When did that tradition start?
No,
what century?
This is again a great question, because it's a logical question. But you've got to remember, the cloth is used. It's used in the daily use of ritual, and by the use, after 2 centuries, the base cloth starts to break down. And so, as I said, that one beautiful chalice cover from Uskadar, as we were handling it, the base silk was tearing because it couldn't support the gold, the medallion of the Lamb of God in the center. That Lamb of God was that thick in terms of the weight of the silver thread, the wire. And so, you know, you're looking at it and you're moving and it goes ripping and oh my God, they're going to kill us. But they were still trying to use that piece, and that was on somewhere in the late 1700s. It was a beautiful piece of workmanship. The hair for the archangels was human hair, and it was done in French knots. And the face of the angels was about that far off of the surface, so it was three-dimensional. And so just by the general deterioration of the cloth, if it's not kept, once it starts becoming brittle, it tears. And so how many pieces would have been saved and sewn on to other base cloth? It's really hard to say. We didn't see many. We saw a few examples, but not many. That necessitated what? The production of new material. And so it's a tradition that constantly was passed on. Now, where did the inspiration come from? Quite obviously, it came from the liturgy, the historical view and record based upon Armenian history and religious history, Old and New Testament images. Also, during times of pilgrimage, when the sacred texts were displayed and the pages were displayed, the congregation that would go up and kiss the relic in the holy book of the Bible, they were introduced to the themes that were being produced in the scriptoria of monasteries. And so, subconsciously, some of those women may have tried to either imitate or enhance or surpass the images that they were seeing. Going, oh, well, I never thought about that in a manner of doing something, and they changed what they were doing in terms of the general domestic tradition. But this was all within the domestic household of passing it on from grandmother to mother to daughter and granddaughter. And some of these people certainly became well known. Individuals knew who made that piece that was being worn by the clergy during the Mass. Word of mouth. They could recognize the pieces. Good points.
I think this will be the last question.
Thank you very much for the lecture. One thing, think of 20-25 questions, and the last one. I would like to concentrate on the book. It's not in English, so I couldn't tell the following. If you could help me out. Is there an English version coming out?
No, the English version is out.
Okay.
You ordered the Turkish ones. But
No, I ordered only English.
Oh, you did order English. Yes, it's available on Amazon.com as well as through the U.S. subsidiary Nettleberry. So you can find it under my name.
Fine. Let me ask you a question. In the later works, which is, let's say, in the 19th century and so forth, looking at the art, does the book cover the following area? The philosophy of Armenian Christianity has evolved over time. Does the art, looking very closely the way you did as a scholar, does the art reflect that evolution of the philosophy of Armenian Christianity, not Christianity?
That's a very good question, and we were very concerned about that. So Father Daniel Fidakian from the Eastern Diocese did read all of the commentary on our commentary on the iconography as well. We read about half of the book, and he made 9 pages of corrections, which we followed precisely, based purely on that point that you had mentioned. But he was impressed also with the fact that we were able to deal with not only the imagery, but associated with the transformations that were taking place in the 19th century. Yes, we have 4 churches of the Armenian Catholic Rite. We have, no, take it back. We have 12 churches of the Armenian Catholic Rite in Constantinople, and we have 4 of the Protestant Rite. Protestant proselytizing in the Ottoman world in the 19th century was substantial. And yes, the Patriarchate did respond through the Divan, the Ottoman authorities, because the Ottomans preferred to only have one representative for all the Armenians, the Millet Bashi, which was the Patriarch, the Patriarch. And so they viewed the spreading of the, quote, Christian revolution or philosophies, okay, outside of the Orthodox or Apostolic tradition, as not only detrimental to their authority, but also the possibilities of creating animosity and conflict within the millet. And so, yes, we did try to cover that, you know, obviously in the iconography and so forth. And Father Findakian made certain that we had matched word with image perfectly. But yes, we were very much aware of that. Very good question, and we approached that. We wanted to make certain that there were no mistakes, certainly in the theology. And so Father Maksudian in New York and Father Findakian, both well-known Armenian clerical scholars, have read and translated and actually made commentaries on the inscriptions and actually provided some substantial information on some of the artifacts that came from the monastery at Caesarea, because Father Maksudian, Father Krikor said, you have the tepsi, the large table of so-and-so who was the head of the monastery at Caesarea. They have 2 of them, which have very long poems on it, okay, which are in the 2nd volume. So, yes, we made certain that we dotted our I's and crossed our T's, because, as I said, part of the religious culture is the sensitivity to the tradition. Okay? So, very good point.
Okay, Dr. Mashiz.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Thank you for this very pleasant presentation, and above all, we as Armenians, we should thank you for your interest and dedication for having collected this.
Over the years, I've had many dear Armenian friends in the Pakistan, and one of them came up to me and said, well, I know you're doing ethnoarchaeology with nomads and material culture. Would you be interested in religious textiles? And I'm like, what? and he was on the board of directors for the Fisherman's Church, Harutian Resurrection Church in Kunkapi. So the director of the board of directors, who was mentioned in the first book and also the second book, wanted to keep alive the culture. And so we went to look at it, and as soon as we saw the collection, I said, look, this has to have the official approval of the patriarch. Well, the previous patriarch had just passed away, and there was a major controversy because the community wanted Mesrab, and the government did not, because Mesrab not only was well educated, you know, with a university degree, but he was young, and he couldn't be controlled, because he had great plans for the resurrection of the community in Kunkapi. Okay?
Before we dismiss, I would like to thank the Organization of Istanbul Armenians and Dr. Ohannes American, who initiated the idea of this event. And also I have to thank Maggie Mangasarian and Sarkis Sanget for their important role in today's organization. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. I'm not going to say by the book, okay? But it's good. Oh yes, and again, Saturday there will be a larger conference in which I'll be speaking. There'll be more information on the metalwork as well as the textiles.
How was it, Abraham?